On his 47th birthday, billionaire Jonathan Blake didn't want a party, he just wanted some quiet. And when he came across 3 identical 6-year-old girls on the sidewalk and the presents they had given him, only then did he realize, the best gifts in life don't come in boxes, they come from little hands. Before we begin, leave a comment below and let us know where you are watching from so we can say hello. Now, let's get into the story. Jonathan Blake was only 47, but his eyes carried the weight of someone far older. To the world, he was a legend, founder and CEO of Blake Tech, a billion-dollar software empire headquartered in Seattle. His name graced magazine covers, his quotes inspired tech summits, and his innovations powered half the country's digital infrastructure. People spoke his name with reverence, envy, or awe. But behind the boardroom doors and penthouse windows, Jonathan lived in silence. He wasn't always like this. Just 4 years ago, he was a father, a proud, foolishly happy father to a bright-eyed boy named William. The boy had his mother's kindness and Jonathan's curiosity. They used to build Lego castles on Sundays and race drones on the roof. Those moments, small, chaotic, and full of laughter, meant more to Jonathan than any merger or milestone. Then came the accident. A routine school trip. A failed brake line. A news alert on his phone that shattered everything. William was gone, and with him, the last flicker of joy in Jonathan's life. His wife couldn't survive the grief. She left, not through death, but through distance. Moved out. Vanished. Took the son with her. Since then, Jonathan existed, but didn't truly live. His birthday was approaching, but there was no celebration planned. No one dared. The man who had once been the life of every gala had become a ghost in designer suits, polished on the outside, hollow within. In public, he smiled. In private, he stared out the window and wondered why fate had chosen him to survive. He had everything money could buy, except the one thing he'd give it all to have again. His son. And the ability to feel something, anything at all. Every year on November 5th, the world seemed to pause around Jonathan Blake, but not for celebration. Once filled with laughter and gifts exchanged with his son, it had become a day of haunting silence since the accident 3 years ago. That morning, his penthouse remained unnaturally still, with curtains drawn to block out the sun. He sat alone in his leather chair, staring at the skyline of Seattle, untouched breakfast growing cold beside him. His assistant had arranged a discreet celebration, as she did every year, flowers, handwritten cards from staff, a private dinner reservation at his favorite restaurant. But Jonathan didn't even open the envelope. He picked up his phone and sent a single message: cancel everything. He didn't want the cake. He didn't want the orchestra or the forced smiles of colleagues. Most of all, he didn't want to be reminded that another year had passed without hearing his son's voice. He walked to the hallway, pausing briefly before the closed door of a bedroom he hadn't entered in over a year. His hand hovered over the doorknob, but he couldn't bring himself to open it. Jonathan Blake hadn't planned to leave his penthouse that morning. Not on his birthday. Not when every year since his son's death felt like reopening a wound that refused to heal. But something about the silence in his luxurious home felt heavier than usual, like even the walls were mourning. He tossed on an old gray jacket, the kind he hadn't worn since his college days, and slipped out without his driver or bodyguard. No phone. No assistant. No destination. He just walked. Seattle's winter sky hung low and gray, and a soft drizzle blurred the lines between sidewalk and street. People bustled past him, umbrellas overhead, eyes glued to their phones, unaware that a billionaire brushed shoulders with them. Jonathan didn't mind. For once, anonymity felt like freedom. He wandered through alleys he hadn't seen in decades, past closed bookstores and graffiti-covered walls. The cold bit through his jacket, but he welcomed the discomfort. It reminded him he was still alive. The rain had grown colder, a fine mist blanketing the streets of Seattle in a gray, ghostly sheen. Jonathan Blake turned down a quiet side street near Pike Place Market, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, his breath curling in the air. He wasn't sure why he'd walked this far, only that every step took him further from the marble silence of his penthouse, and somehow, that felt right. He stopped when he saw movement beside a crumbling brick wall. 3 small figures sat huddled together beneath a makeshift cardboard canopy, their backs pressed close to each other for warmth. A single threadbare blanket covered their knees, and despite the wind, none of them shivered. Jonathan blinked. They looked identical. 3 little girls. Same golden hair clumped beneath knit beanies, same round faces smudged with street dust, same oversized jackets wrapped around too thin frames. 6 years old, maybe 7 at most. They sat in eerie, perfect symmetry like they had done this every night of their lives. He couldn't look away. One of them, he'd later learn her name was Sophia, noticed him first. She nudged the other 2 gently, and soon, Bella and Alice turned their heads, 3 pairs of deep blue eyes locking onto his. They didn't speak. They didn't beg. They just watched. Jonathan took a cautious step forward. "Hey," he said softly, almost unsure of the word. "Are you girls okay?" A beat passed. Then Bella, the one in the middle, lifted her chin. "We're fine," she said with surprising calm. "We're just waiting." "For what?" Jonathan asked, kneeling slowly so he didn't seem threatening. "For a kind face," Alice whispered. "Mama used to say that's how you find safe places." Jonathan felt something curling in his chest. He didn't know if it was pity, guilt, or something older, something closer to grief. "Are you here alone?" Sophia nodded. "Where's your mom and dad?" Jonathan asked. Sophia said softly, "Mom died. She was sick. They took her to the hospital but," her voice broke. "But we haven't seen her since." Bella added, "They said we'd be taken to a shelter. But we were scared. So we ran." Jonathan's heart twisted. "How long have you been on the street?" Alice glanced at her sisters, then shrugged. 2 birthdays." Jonathan couldn't speak for a moment. Their answer didn't just hit him, it split something open. 2 birthdays. They marked time not in days or weeks, but in how many birthdays they'd spent waiting. "Do you have any family?" he asked gently. Sophia pulled something from her jacket pocket, a faded photo of a woman with the same blonde hair and bright blue eyes. "Just Mama," she said. "She said Daddy left before we were born. She didn't know where he went." Jonathan felt a lump in his throat. He tried to form a response, but found none that didn't feel like a lie. "We don't ask for much," Bella said after a pause. "Just a smile. Or someone to say happy birthday when it's time." That's when it hit him. Today was his birthday. He hadn't told anyone. Hadn't planned anything. But somehow, these girls, these 3 living reflections of innocence, had brought it up without knowing. He opened his mouth to speak, but Sophia was already rustling through a paper bag beside her. She pulled out a small, square box wrapped in scraps of colored newspaper, taped together with childlike care. She held it out. "We were saving this," she said. "We made it together. We were gonna give it to Mama when she got better. But, maybe you need it now." Jonathan stared at the gift. He didn't deserve it. He, a man of endless wealth, had walked through life these past years a shell. And now 3 children with nothing, were offering him something made with their own hands and hearts. "I can't accept this," he whispered. "But you're the kind face," Alice said, smiling. "And kind faces need gifts, too." He didn't take the box just yet. He knelt lower, eye level with all 3 of them. "What are your names?" he asked. "Sophia. Bella. Alice," they said in turns, their voices like notes of the same song. Jonathan blinked back tears. They didn't know it, but they had just saved him. And he hadn't even opened the box. He glanced at the street, then back at them. "Can I take you somewhere safe? Somewhere warm?" They looked at each other, hesitant but trusting. Bella answered for all three of them. "We don't go with strangers." Jonathan knelt down again, clutching the box to his chest. "So I'll come back tomorrow? Same time. And I'll bring hot chocolate and stories." They smiled. "Okay," Alice said. "But you better not forget." He laughed, a full, broken, healing laugh that sounded strangely familiar in his own throat. As he walked away, holding the gift, he didn't notice the sun peeking out from behind the clouds. But they did. And they waved until he was gone. Jonathan Blake stepped out of the elevator, the soft chime echoing off the marble walls of his penthouse. Rainwater pooled at his feet as he stepped inside, his Italian leather shoes soaked through, and his tailored charcoal coat clinging to him like a second skin. He didn't bother switching on the lights. The skyline of Seattle blinked through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, casting a cold, flickering glow over the sterile silence of the room. In his right pocket, heavy and delicate all at once, was a small box wrapped in scraps of colored paper. It crinkled when he sat on the edge of the bed, and he slowly reached in to retrieve it. The wrapping was uneven, wrinkled in places, frayed at the corners, a few pieces held together with tape that had clearly been reused. Yet, it felt like the most valuable thing he'd ever owned. He placed it gently on his nightstand. But he didn't open it. Jonathan stared at the gift for several minutes. He felt an urge, a strange tension, like the box was calling to him. But another part of him recoiled from the thought of disturbing it. There was something sacred about it, something beyond logic or explanation. The last time he'd felt anything even close to this, was the day his son was born. He leaned back, clothes still damp, head tilted toward the ceiling as if searching for answers written in the shadows. His thoughts were spinning, still wrapped around what had just happened in that rain-soaked alley beside Pike Place Market. 3 little girls. Identical. Blonde curls matted from the drizzle, cheeks rosy from the cold, hands clasped tightly together as if the world could only be faced when they were united. Sophia had been the first to speak, her voice quiet but warm. "Happy birthday," she'd said, offering him a smile that carried the weight of innocence and knowing all at once. He hadn't told anyone it was his birthday. Not even his assistant. And yet she knew. Or sensed. Or maybe, just guessed and got lucky. But somehow, it hadn't felt like luck. It felt like fate. Bella had stepped forward next. "We made this," she said, holding out the box as Alice stood behind her, half hiding, half curious. "We were saving it for someone who'd need it more than we did." And just like that, they gave it to him. Not begged. Not bargained. Just gave. No one had given Jonathan Blake anything in a long, long time, not without strings, not without expectation. Certainly not like this. These girls had nothing, not even matching shoes, but they gave freely, purely. That box wasn't just paper and glue. It was a gesture that cracked open something inside him that had been locked for years. Now, back in the cold silence of his penthouse, that crack widened. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached out, letting them hover just above the box on the nightstand. The paper had been drawn on. Stick figures. A smiling sun. A little house with 3 people holding hands. Crayon scrawls in red, blue, and green, Sophia's, Bella's, and Alice's, maybe? Or perhaps all 3 had worked together. Jonathan found himself wondering what kind of childhood they'd had. Where were their parents? How long had they been on the streets? What did they eat? Where did they sleep when the wind howled and the city turned its back on children? His mind filled with possibilities, each more heartbreaking than the last. He knew those thoughts would keep him awake, but strangely, he didn't mind. For the first time in years, his insomnia wasn't caused by regret or grief or the relentless clatter of business decisions. It was caused by three little girls who had looked at him and seen, not a billionaire, not a CEO, but a man worth giving something to. He didn't want to ruin that moment by opening the box. Not yet. His phone buzzed on the dresser, but he ignored it. It was probably a board member or a client or some journalist desperate for an angle. He didn't care. Tonight wasn't about the company, or the press, or stock value. It was about three tiny strangers who'd cracked open his soul like sunlight through storm clouds. Jonathan stood slowly and moved to the closet. He peeled off his soaked clothes and changed into a plain gray sweatshirt and sweatpants. For a man who spent his life being tailored and pressed, he looked almost normal. Human. He poured himself a glass of water, though his throat still felt tight. Walking back to the bedroom, he passed the framed photo on his hallway table. His son, Connor, smiling at the beach, sand on his nose, ice cream in hand. He stopped. Connor would have been 8 this year. He blinked hard. The triplets were 6, he remembered. Just a couple of years younger than Connor. Maybe that was why their presence affected him so deeply, maybe it wasn't just their kindness. Maybe it was how they reminded him of the boy he'd lost. Or maybe they were a message. Or a second chance. He turned off the hallway light and climbed into bed, the city's light spilling across the room. He stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, then turned to the nightstand. The gift was still there. He reached for it again, cradling it in his hands. He could feel the slight lump of something inside, probably something small, maybe a toy, or a drawing, or even just a note. He could open it right now. He had every reason to. But something inside whispered, not tonight. It wasn't time yet. He set it down gently, as if it might break. Then, without really thinking about it, he opened the top drawer of the nightstand and pulled out a silk handkerchief. He wrapped the box carefully, as if it were glass, and placed it back into the drawer with reverence. That box, whatever it held, was more than a gift. It was a reminder. That love still existed in the smallest corners. That Gray sometimes showed up in the middle of nowhere, wearing hand-me-down shoes and carrying paper-wrapped miracles. That 3 little girls who had every reason to ask for something instead chose to give. As Jonathan drifted into a restless sleep, one image clung to his mind, Sophia, Bella, and Alice standing under the rain, hands interlocked, eyes hopeful. Their laughter, so soft it almost didn't exist, echoed through his memories. And though the gift remained unopened, his heart, after years of silence, had begun to open wide. The next morning, sunlight streamed across the city skyline. Jonathan sat at the edge of his bed, freshly showered and in a crisp shirt, yet unmoved. He reached for the box again. His fingers hovered over the edge of the wrapping paper, but again, he didn't pull. Instead, he pressed the box against his chest and closed his eyes. He saw them clearly. The girls hadn't asked for anything. Not food, not money, not shelter. Just, the act of giving. That made the gift sacred. The box stayed on his nightstand that day. And the next. By the 3rd day, he began a strange ritual. Each morning, Jonathan would wake up, shower, dress, and sit beside the box. Sometimes he would speak to it, quietly, like he was trying to reach someone far away. Bella was the one who looked at me the longest, he'd murmur. I think she saw the sadness. Other days, he'd simply touch the box's corner, feel the tape, the slight crunch of paper under his fingers. It wasn't just a gift anymore. It was a memory preserved in paper and tape. A moment of pure humanity in a world that had long since felt robotic. One morning, as the city buzzed beneath him, Jonathan found himself picking up a pair of scissors. He didn't intend to open it. He just wanted to trim the edge where the paper had begun to peel. As he snipped the corner, something shifted inside the box. the faintest rattle. It was the first time he realized he didn't even know what was in it. His chest tightened. A rock? A drawing? A broken toy? Or worse, what if it was something they treasured and gave up just for him? Suddenly, he couldn't breathe. That night, he paced the room with the box in hand. He couldn't put it down. It followed him from room to room, like a fragile heartbeat. He placed it on the kitchen island while he poured himself a drink. Then carried it to the balcony as he watched the lights shimmer across the sound. Eventually, he sat in front of the fireplace, the box perched on his knees like a newborn. And still, he didn't open it. By the end of the week, the gift had changed him. He didn't answer his phone as much. He cancelled a meeting with investors just to walk through Pike Place again, hoping to see blonde pigtails or hear a giggle. He even visited a nearby soup kitchen, asking if anyone had seen 3 6-year-old identical girls. But no one had. "Are you sure they weren't angels?" a volunteer joked. Jonathan almost nodded. Each night, the box remained unopened. But something else opened, within him. He found himself looking at the world differently. When a street vendor waved at a passing child, he smiled. When he saw a tired mother pushing a stroller through the rain, he stopped to offer his umbrella. It was like the act of not opening the gift preserved the purity of what it symbolized: hope, kindness, and unspoken love. 2 weeks passed. He no longer needed an alarm clock. He woke up thinking of the girls, Sophia's boldness, Bella's gentleness, Alice's laughter. The penthouse still sparkled, but now it carried warmth. The cold luxury didn't suffocate him the way it once had. And every morning, his hand found the box. One night, after returning from a visit to a children's shelter, Jonathan sat at his desk with the box in front of him. He leaned in close, breathing in the faint scent of old paper, dust, and crayons. Yes, there was a slight waxy scent. His heart skipped. Could they have drawn something? Did they leave a picture of themselves? Suddenly, the fear of knowing, and losing that mystery, paralyzed him. If he opened it and it was something small and forgettable, would the magic vanish? But if he never opened it, would he always wonder? He placed the box back on the nightstand. He whispered aloud, "I'm not ready." Then, after a pause, he added something he hadn't said in years. "Thank you." In the days that followed, Jonathan began documenting what had happened. Not for press. Not for a biography. Just for himself. He wrote about the box, the girls, and the way their presence had awakened something dormant in him. Each word poured out like a confession, like a prayer. And still, the box remained sealed. But not untouched. He held it every night. Like a compass. Like a heartbeat. Like a treasure that didn't need to be opened to prove its worth. It was a morning when Seattle was shrouded in a thick, low fog. It rolled in from the bay like a secret, winding through alleys and pressing down on the windows of Jonathan Blake's penthouse. But in his mind, there was only one thought: he had to get back. He didn't wait for his assistant. He didn't summon a driver. Instead, Jonathan bundled 2 thick fleece blankets under one arm, carried 3 large brown paper bags of warm breakfast, eggs, toast, sausages, and cartons of orange juice, in the other, and drove himself to Pike Place Market in his black SUV, the gift box from the night before still in the inner pocket of his coat. His eyes scanned the sidewalk as he parked across the street. Even from the car window, he could already feel his heart pounding. He looked toward the spot near the corner, where the girls had been the night before. Where they had smiled and sang. Where Bella had given him the gift. But it was empty. No cardboard shelter. No discarded blanket. No childish hum echoing against the cold concrete walls. Just a smear of dirt where their tiny setup had been. Jonathan stepped out of the car and approached slowly, like someone approaching the site of an accident they're not ready to accept. "Maybe they're just getting food," he whispered aloud, trying to reason. He waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. A vendor across the street opened his cart. A man walked by with a coffee in hand. Jonathan clutched the brown bags tighter. Still nothing. He crossed to the nearest flower stall and gestured to the older woman arranging sunflowers. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Did you happen to see 3 little girls here yesterday evening? Blonde. About 6. They looked exactly alike." The woman frowned, clearly trying to remember. "You mean the triplets?" she finally said. "Yeah, they've been around the last couple weeks, usually after dark. Sweet girls. Always polite." Jonathan's heart leapt. "Do you know where they are now?" The woman shook her head. "No idea. I haven't seen them since yesterday. Sometimes they just disappear for days. It's like they live in the shadows." Jonathan tried stall after stall. A butcher said he'd given them a leftover sandwich once. A barista said she'd seen them skipping past his shop window singing softly. But no one knew where they slept. No one knew their last names. No one even knew if they had anyone looking for them. It hit him like a wave, they were truly invisible. He walked back to the place they'd been. His eyes scanned every detail. He found a tiny pink ribbon under the bench, one he remembered seeing in Sophia's hair. He crouched and picked it up with trembling fingers. The dampness in the air made it stick to his palm like it was begging not to be left behind. He sat on the bench. The food he brought was still warm, but untouched. He opened one of the bags and placed 3 sandwiches down gently, side by side. They didn't come. Hours passed. Fog turned to drizzle, and drizzle turned to steady rain. People came and went. But not them. He pressed a hand to his chest. The feeling was worse than grief, it was fear. Not for himself, but for 3 little girls who had found a way to brighten his darkest night, only to vanish with the sunrise. By the time the sky darkened again, Jonathan was soaked. The bags were empty. The blankets unused. His clothes clung to him like regret. That night, back in his penthouse, the silence was deafening. He poured himself a glass of whiskey but didn't drink it. He placed the ribbon on the nightstand beside the unopened gift box. Jonathan Blake sat alone in his office, the lights dimmed, Seattle's skyline glowing faintly behind him through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The small, lumpy gift box, still wrapped in patchwork paper, rested quietly on the corner of his desk. He hadn't opened it. He couldn't. It wasn't just a box anymore, it was a promise. A symbol of something he didn't fully understand yet, but knew he had to honor. And he couldn't keep waiting. He had returned to the same street corner for 7 days in a row. He brought food, blankets, even new clothes, but the 3 little girls were nowhere. Sophia, Bella, and Alice, he now knew their names by heart, could hear their identical giggles echo in his memory. The way they had shyly handed him the box and insisted, "It's for your birthday. We want you to smile today." They were gone. He had let them walk away that night, never imagining they'd disappear completely. But now every instinct in him screamed that they needed help. The next morning, Jonathan summoned his most trusted advisor, Evan Ross, and his longtime legal counsel, Mary Chen. "I want to find them," Jonathan said flatly, no hesitation in his voice. "All 3 of them." Evan frowned. "Who exactly?" "The triplets," Jonathan said. "Sophia, Bella, and Alice. 6 years old. Blonde hair. Same soft curls. Same warm eyes. They live on the streets. I don't know how, but they found me. And I won't rest until I find them." Mary leaned forward, voice cautious. "Jonathan, there are tens of thousands of homeless children across the country. This could be near impossible. I don't care how long it takes or how much it costs, he replied, eyes burning. This isn't about a public gesture. This is personal. Within 24 hours, a task force was assembled. Jonathan hired a private detective agency, top-tier, discreet, experienced in missing persons. The team began by canvassing every shelter in Seattle and surrounding counties, checking intake records, speaking with volunteers, distributing sketches generated from Jonathan's detailed descriptions. He gave them exact instructions, no questions asked. No police unless necessary. No pressure. Just help. He even drafted a reward notice, though it was never posted online publicly. Instead, it was printed on discreet flyers handed to aid workers across Washington state. Missing, 3 girls, age 6. Blonde hair. Triplets. First names, Sophia, Bella, Alice. Seen together. Kind. Brave. Last known location, downtown Seattle. Reward for information. No legal involvement unless safety is a concern. He didn't just want anyone to find them, he wanted them found safely. Trusted. 3 days later, one of the private investigators, Darren Lyle, called in with a lead. A staff member at St. Mary's shelter said they saw 3 girls matching the description. About a week ago. Came in during a rainstorm, stayed just one night. Jonathan was there within the hour. The shelter was modest, run by a quiet nun named Sister Clarice. She led Jonathan to a small back room, where she'd let the girls sleep. They were sweet girls, she said. Polite. They sang a song together while eating soup. Broke my heart, really. They didn't give much information. Said their mom had gone to heaven, and they were just trying to stay together. Did they say where they were going? Jonathan asked. They said something about a lady with green eyes who sometimes gives them sandwiches by the old church downtown. Jonathan nodded slowly. Thank you, sister. That helps more than you know. Armed with that detail, the search widened. Jonathan expanded his team to include outreach workers who knew the local streets better than any detective ever could. People who saw the invisible. Word quietly spread among homeless communities, through soup kitchens, shelters, subway stations. A man is looking for 3 blonde girls. Not the police. Just a kind man. There's no danger. Just hope. Tips trickled in, some false, some vague, some eerily close. A man at the Capitol Hill train station claimed to have seen 3 tiny angels singing together for spare change. A barista at a 24-hour diner said she'd seen them share a single muffin and then run when a police officer walked in. Each story painted a clearer picture: the girls were still out there. Together. Avoiding attention. Surviving. But for Jonathan, each day without them became more agonizing. He dreamed of them, those 3 little faces staring up at him, arms outstretched with that precious box. What had they gone through to get to that moment? What were they going through now? What if someone cruel had found them first? His staff began to worry. Jonathan skipped meetings, ignored emails, canceled a keynote speech in Silicon Valley. This wasn't a distraction, it had become his driving purpose. I lost my son, he told Evan one night. I had everything, and then nothing. But those girls, Sophia, Bella, and Alice, they reminded me of what I was missing: innocence. Hope. Humanity. I don't care what it takes. I will bring them home. One afternoon, a street violinist named Luca came forward. He approached one of the outreach workers and said, I saw them. I'm sure of it. 3 blonde girls, same height. One had a ripped pink coat. They sang with me for a bit, harmonized like angels. I gave them my tips for the day. Jonathan arranged to meet Luca personally. The man described their voices in detail. They called each other by name. Sophia had the loudest laugh. Bella was shy, she watched people's shoes, like she was figuring out who to trust. And Alice, she kept looking up, like she was searching for someone. Where were they headed? Jonathan asked. They said something about a train. Said they wanted to ride to where the nice people live. It wasn't much. But it was enough. That night, after much debate, Jonathan made a bold move. He published a carefully worded open letter in the Seattle Times and syndicated it nationwide. To the 3 girls who gave me the most important gift I've ever received, Sophia, Bella, and Alice, if you see this, I'm still here. I still have your present. I haven't opened it yet. I won't until I see you again. You reminded me what it means to be seen. To be valued. And I want to return the favor. If anyone knows where they are, please help me find them. No questions. Just love. After that letter, the response changed. More volunteers joined the search. Churches held candlelight vigils. Hashtags emerged, hashtag find the triplets, hashtag Jonathan's promise. Donations poured into shelters. For the first time, people didn't just see homeless kids. They saw Sophia, Bella, and Alice. They saw their own children. And though the girls still hadn't been found, something had already shifted in the world around them. Jonathan often sat late into the night with the box in his lap, tracing the names he'd scrawled on a notepad over and over. Sophia. Bella. Alice. Not just names. Anchors. Promises. Light. He didn't know where they were yet. But he knew they were worth everything. And now, so did the world. The skyline of Seattle loomed gray and unfeeling outside Jonathan Blake's penthouse, but something inside him had changed forever. Days blurred into nights, and nights blurred into long, silent reflections beside a small paper-wrapped box that still sat unopened on his nightstand. But this wasn't about what was inside the gift anymore. It was about the 3 little girls who had given it to him. 3 tiny voices, still fresh in his mind, had whispered in unison that day. Happy birthday, mister. Their identical blonde curls danced in the wind. Sophia, Bella, and Alice. 6 years old. Fragile, radiant, and impossibly brave. He had walked into that day believing he was done with birthdays, believing he was done with life, really. But those girls gave him a reason to look forward again, and more importantly, to look outward. Jonathan had built empires. He had raised a tech dynasty from his garage and transformed it into a global powerhouse. But sitting across from 3 shoeless girls beneath a bus stop awning, he had never felt smaller. Or more human. The next morning, he stood at the window of his corporate tower, staring at the conference table below him, the same one where he had once closed a $3.2 billion merger. Now, that room seemed absurd. Cold. Irrelevant. He sent a company-wide email that simply read: Clear the 17th floor. Effective immediately. The conference room is no longer for closing deals. It's for opening doors. The stunned executives gathered hours later as movers began bringing in cots, fold-out tables, and whiteboards instead of espresso carts and investor decks. What is this? Asked his CFO, a woman who had been with him since the beginning. Jonathan stood at the head of the room, holding up a crumpled sketch drawn in crayon, 3 smiling stick girls, each labeled with their name in shaky, childish lettering, Sophia, Bella, and Alice. This is who we work for now, he said. He called it the Maisie Project, though no one understood the name at first. It wasn't just about the triplets. It was about all the children like them. Children he had never seen, and worse, never bothered to. Maisie, he explained, is every kid who gives more than they take. That week, they built a small shelter model inside the old boardroom, 10 beds, 2 meals a day, shower access, and educational programs. They brought in teachers, volunteers, and even child psychologists. Jonathan sat on the floor of the space the first night, watching as 5 kids curled up under freshly washed blankets. Not one of them looked older than 10. All of them had names. And stories. The media caught wind of it quickly. Billionaire CEO opens corporate shelter for homeless children, the headlines read. But Jonathan refused interviews. This isn't PR, he told his team. This is atonement. The real twist came when he announced the next phase. He was liquidating $100 million of his personal assets to seed a national version of the Mazy Project. His advisors begged him to reconsider. You're talking about giving up your estate in Napa. The yacht. The private jet. Jonathan's voice was calm. Those things never made me feel anything close to what I felt when Sophia handed me that gift. But not everything went smoothly. The first satellite shelter in Portland faced fierce backlash from local officials. It'll attract more homeless families, critics warned. Jonathan flew in personally, unannounced, and walked into the city council chamber holding a small, wrapped box, the original gift. He set it down on the table. If I told you 3 little girls gave me this instead of asking for food or money, he said quietly, would you still say they aren't worth helping? There was silence. And then a vote. The shelter was approved. Back in Seattle, the office space was unrecognizable. Once a sterile haven for power suits and quarterly reports, it now buzzed with crayons, laughter, and the occasional wail from a child struggling to read their first sentence. Jonathan began spending less time at the top floor and more on the shelter floor. He helped serve breakfast. He wiped tears. He knelt beside a boy learning to tie his shoes and smiled like a proud father. I don't know what I'm doing most days, he admitted to one of the counselors, but I feel more alive than I have in 10 years. One evening, as he walked past the planning boards filled with shelter blueprints and handwritten notes from children, he stopped cold. Someone had posted a drawing on the wall, a new one. It showed 3 identical girls holding hands beneath a rainbow. One of them held a sign that said, in crooked lettering, "Don't forget us." He reached out and touched the paper, tracing their smiles. He hadn't forgotten them. In fact, he thought of them constantly. But despite all efforts, private investigators, outreach campaigns, reward posters, Sophia, Bella, and Alice remained untraceable. As if they had vanished into the mist the day they met him. Some days, he wondered if they had been angels sent to test him. One night, while reviewing shelter applications, he found one filed anonymously. It had no contact number, no address, just a short sentence scrawled in pink ink. "We're okay, Mr. Blake. We see what you're doing. Thank you." His breath caught. No signature. But he knew. He held the note in one hand and the unopened birthday box in the other. The tears came suddenly, uninvited. Not of grief. But of grace. This was more than a charity now. This was purpose. This was legacy. Within 6 months, the Mazy Project expanded to 12 cities. Within a year, it had helped over 4,000 children. But to Jonathan, the numbers didn't matter as much as the one moment that started it all. He still hadn't opened the gift. The rain returned to Seattle the same way it had a year ago, soft and steady, as if time had looped back with a poetic sense of timing. For Jonathan Blake, this day no longer meant board meetings or champagne toasts in glass towers. His birthday, once celebrated with excess, had become something quieter. Something heavier. Something sacred. He stood near Pike Place Market, beneath the same rusted canopy where the encounter had changed his life. His hair was damp, his coat clung to him, and his eyes scanned every face in the crowd. It wasn't hope he wore, it was something deeper. A stubborn kind of faith. The cardboard shelter was long gone. No sign of the little girls with paper-wrapped magic. No signs of Sophia, Bella, or Alice. A low murmur of voices pulled him from his thoughts. Turning slowly, Jonathan's heart stuttered. A group of children approached, hand in hand with parents, social workers, and volunteers. There were dozens of them, some bundled in donated coats, others proudly wearing clothes with "The Maisie Project" stitched across the chest. And they were smiling. "Mr. Blake," shouted a boy no older than 10, breaking into a sprint. He threw himself into Jonathan's arms. "You helped my mom get a job." Another child followed, then another. One girl carried a card made of purple construction paper that read, "Happy birthday, Mr. Blake," in crayon letters, covered with glitter and crooked hearts. A woman stepped forward, her voice trembling. "I'm not sure you remember us. You paid our rent when we were evicted last Christmas. That gave me enough time to start over." Jonathan blinked, overwhelmed. "Of course I remember. How's Lily?" "Thriving. She's sleeping through the night now." For the next hour, the small sidewalk corner became a sanctuary of celebration. The children who had once been faces in forgotten shelters were now messengers of joy. The cold concrete was softened by picnic blankets, thermoses of cocoa, and mismatched cupcakes. There was laughter. So much laughter. But Jonathan's eyes kept drifting toward the empty space just beneath the overhang. A space that somehow still held 3 tiny shadows burned into his memory. As the afternoon dimmed into a cool blue dusk, one of his foundation staff leaned in. "We brought something," she whispered. "From the storage boxes." From a weathered tote, she lifted 3 paper crowns. Faded. Child-sized. Carefully repaired with tape and care. Jonathan's breath caught. He recognized them immediately. The triplets, Sophia, Bella, and Alice, had each worn one. They weren't store-bought but handmade, scrawled with their names in smudged marker. The crowns had been left behind in the shelter box when they disappeared. He took them slowly, as though touching relics. That day had never left him. He could still see Sophia's bright blue eyes as she asked, "Do you like surprises?" Or Bella's giggle when she told him the box was guarded by princess magic. Or Alice, the quiet one, who had placed the gift gently in his lap and whispered, "It's okay if you don't open it yet." They had given him something no empire ever could, an anchor. And yet, they were still gone. Jonathan sat on the edge of the planter box beside the market wall. The gift still lay in his nightstand drawer, untouched. A promise made and kept. But not fulfilled. As evening rolled in, people began packing up. There were hugs, waves, and promises to visit the new shelter being built downtown. Volunteers loaded the leftover food into vans. Still, Jonathan remained in place, staring out at the quiet street. Suddenly, a flash of pink caught his eye. Then yellow. Then lavender. 3 little girls were walking in single file across the street, their blonde ponytails bouncing in sync. Each wore a handmade crown. Not the same ones, but identical in shape and style. Jonathan froze. He stood slowly, heart pounding against his ribs. They were closer now. The girls were 6, maybe just turned. Their hair was lighter than before, curled from the rain. Each had a backpack, worn and dotted with cartoon patches. He couldn't breathe. Sophia. Bella. Alice. But then, they turned. And for a terrible second, his chest collapsed. It wasn't them. Just another set of siblings, guided by their mother toward the bus stop. He smiled at them gently as they passed. The oldest one waved. He waved back with an ache he didn't try to hide. As the street emptied again, Jonathan leaned his head back and closed his eyes. He whispered, "Where are you, girls?" No answer. Just the whisper of wind, the faraway sound of seagulls, and the soft hum of the city. For all his money, for all his influence, he couldn't bring them back. Not yet. But that didn't mean he'd stop looking. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the photo he always carried now. It wasn't taken by a camera, but drawn by a child at one of the shelters. It showed him sitting on the ground, surrounded by 3 girls with crowns. Beneath it, in messy handwriting, were the words, "You didn't open it. But you opened your heart." That night, he returned to the penthouse, now less pristine, more lived in. Crayon drawings covered the fridge. A teddy bear one of the shelter kids forgot sat on his couch like a guest. And on the nightstand, in the same place since last year, sat the box. He held it gently. The corners were softer now. The wrapping paper had faded just a little. But the tape still held, and the shape was still the same, lumpy, imperfect, irreplaceable. He sat in silence for a long time, staring at it in the dim light. A knock startled him. He opened the door to one of the foundation interns. "Sorry to bother you, Mr. Blake." A note was just slipped under the office door. Jonathan's brow furrowed. He took the envelope and thanked her. Inside, on a folded piece of pink paper, written in crayon, were 6 words. "We remember your laugh. S.B. His hands trembled. He read it again. Then a third time. The handwriting, slanted, familiar. The initials. The simplicity. It was them. It had to be. He stood in the middle of the room, stunned, elated, terrified all at once. Were they near? Had they seen him today? Were they safe? A million questions flooded in, none with answers. But one thing was clear. They knew. They remembered. And somehow, they were watching. Jonathan looked back at the gift box on the nightstand. He walked over, lifted it slowly, and placed it inside a glass case. Still unopened. Still sacred. Because now, more than ever, he understood. Some gifts don't need to be opened. Some gifts are reminders. And some gifts, 3 of them, to be exact, were out there somewhere, wearing paper crowns and carrying pieces of his heart in their small hands. He would find them. And until he did, he would carry their love in silence. A love wrapped in paper. A love that never faded. A love that changed everything. The tulips bloomed early that spring. It had been exactly 1 year since Jonathan Blake received the small, hand-wrapped box from 3 little girls on the sidewalk, Sophia, Bella, and Alice. Blonde, identical, and unforgettable. He never opened that gift. He couldn't. Not until he found them again. He had tried. God knows how hard he had tried. The triplets had vanished like whispers in the rain, leaving behind only a memory, a paper-wrapped box, and a man who had once been a billionaire but now lived with the aching emptiness of almost. Almost rescued them. Almost helped. Almost found them. But this spring was different. The air in Portland was crisp as Jonathan stepped out of his private SUV in front of the newest branch of the Mazie Foundation, his nonprofit that now operated in 27 cities across the U.S., serving thousands of children every month. His staff greeted him warmly, and he smiled, but behind that smile, a quiet longing still stirred. This wasn't just a PR visit. It was personal. Jonathan walked through the gates into the garden courtyard of the shelter, where kids laughed and played beneath fluttering ribbons and balloons. Spring Festival, they called it. For many of these children, it was the only celebration they had all year. He passed a table of face painters, a line for ice cream, and a handmade booth labeled "Make a Wish." His heart warmed seeing all the children, each one clothed, fed, and loved, something he couldn't be sure Sophia, Bella, and Alice had received. He still saw their faces in his dreams. 3 pairs of blue eyes. 3 smiles that had shaken him to the core. He was about to turn toward the main hall when he heard it. Laughter, high-pitched, melodic, familiar. He froze. His head snapped toward the sound. It was coming from under the wisteria arbor at the far end of the garden. A cluster of kids were gathered there, but three stood out, three little girls sitting on a bench, wearing matching pastel dresses. Their golden hair glimmered in the sun. Their feet didn't quite touch the ground. One held a lollipop, one had a butterfly drawn on her cheek, and one was braiding the other's hair. Triplets. Jonathan's heart skipped. Could it be? He walked slowly, cautiously, as if afraid the moment might evaporate if he moved too fast. His breath caught in his throat. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding louder than the children's laughter. Then one of them looked up. And stopped mid-laugh. Jonathan froze. It was her. Sophia? Or was it Bella? Or Alice? Her eyes widened. She tapped the others quickly, and all three turned in unison to face him. "Do you remember me?" he asked, voice trembling. There was a beat of silence, and then, "You didn't open the gift," one of them said. Jonathan staggered back as if struck. The same voice. The same words they had whispered that night beneath the street lamp. "You'll open it when you find us," they had said. He fell to his knees before them. "Where have you been?" he choked. "I looked everywhere. I never stopped." The girls rushed forward, hugging him, all three at once, little arms wrapping around his shoulders, neck, and back. "We knew you were looking," said Bella, or was it Sophia? "We saw your face on TV. You helped other kids. So we waited." "Where?" Jonathan asked, his voice hoarse. "Where did you go?" Alice, he remembered the slight dimple on her left cheek, spoke this time. "A kind lady found us sleeping in a laundry room. She brought us here. We didn't tell them about you." "Not right away." "Why not?" "Because we wanted to know if you really meant it," Bella said softly. "If you'd still want us even if you had everything again." Tears stung Jonathan's eyes. He tried to speak but no words came. Behind them, staff began to notice the commotion. Olivia, the branch director, rushed over. "Mr. Blake, are you all right?" "These girls," Jonathan pointed, breathless. "They're the reason this all exists. They're the ones." Olivia blinked. "You mean, these are your girls?" Jonathan nodded. For a long time, no one moved. Then Olivia knelt, speechless, staring at the three girls. "They told us almost nothing. Just their names. No last name. No background. No family. They're my family now," Jonathan whispered. He stood and turned to the triplets. "Do you still want to come with me? Not just visit, but home?" The three girls looked at each other. Sophia grinned first. Bella nodded. Alice reached for his hand. "We never stopped waiting," Alice said. That night, Jonathan didn't return to his penthouse. Instead, he stayed in the guest wing of the Portland shelter, sleeping on the floor with three giggling girls curled up in blankets around him. They told him stories. He told them some back. He promised pancakes in the morning. And just before they fell asleep, Sophia whispered, "You still haven't opened it." Jonathan smiled. "I wanted to wait until you were there." The next morning, under the golden warmth of spring sunlight, Jonathan sat with the girls at a table in the garden. He pulled out the faded gift box he had carried with him every day for a year. The wrapping was a little more crumpled now, the tape yellowing. He unwrapped it slowly, carefully, as if it were made of porcelain. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper, 3 crayons, and a small origami heart. He opened the paper. It read, in shaky handwriting. "Dear Mr. We don't know if you're rich or not. But we hope you're kind. If you open this, it means you still believe in good people. Please don't forget us. Love. Sophia, Bella, and Alice." Jonathan stared at the note, chest heaving. The girls leaned in close, their heads on his shoulder. "I'll never forget you," he said, voice cracking. "Never again." Later that week, headlines read, "Billionaire finally finds lost triplets who changed his life, and they're home to stay." The legal process was a maze, frustrating, dehumanizing, cruel. Jonathan, once a man who could sign off billion-dollar acquisitions with a smile, now spent sleepless nights filling out paperwork, making calls, and facing endless questions from social workers. "Why you?" one attorney asked him coldly. "There are shelters and state facilities prepared for this." "I'm not here because I pity them," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm here because I was meant to find them. I need them as much as they need me." The first night they arrived at his home was unforgettable. His penthouse, once silent and clinical, was suddenly alive with noise, squeals, laughter, footsteps running up and down the polished wooden floors. The girls had never seen so many lights. They'd never touched carpet so soft. They insisted on sharing one bed, though he had set up separate rooms for each of them. "We've always slept together," Bella explained. "We get scared alone." Jonathan stood by the doorway as they curled up in the middle of the California king-sized bed, arms and legs tangled like puppies. A warmth settled in his chest that no amount of wealth had ever given him. That night, he didn't sleep in his own room. He sat just outside their door, listening to their breathing, the occasional whispered story, and once, so soft it almost didn't exist, a quiet, "I think I like him." The days that followed were filled with questions. "Do we have to leave again?" "No," he answered firmly. "You're staying." "Do you have a real job?" He chuckled. "Yes. But I'll always come home in time to tuck you in. Can we have pancakes for dinner?" "Every night, if you want." But the hardest question came from Alice, the quietest one. "Are you going to disappear too?" He knelt down, leveled his eyes with hers, and said, "Not ever. Not unless you tell me to go. And even then, I'll stay right outside the door." Now, back in the courtroom, Jonathan held his breath as the judge looked over the final documents. "Mr. Blake," she said slowly, "are you prepared to accept full legal guardianship and responsibility for these 3 minors?" He glanced down at the girls. Bella was clenching his pinky tightly. Alice had drawn a tiny heart on the back of his hand with her purple marker. Sophia, sitting between them, looked up with fierce pride. "I'm not just prepared," he said, voice catching. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." The courtroom was still. Then came the words he had prayed for. "This court grants you permanent guardianship and full adoptive rights. Congratulations, Mr. Blake." Before he could react, all 3 girls threw their arms around him at once. A small, chaotic bundle of joy. Bella pressed her cheek into his shoulder. Alice whispered, "Does this mean we're safe now?" And Sophia, proud and brave, said, "Does this mean we're Blake's now?" He pulled them closer. "It means you're mine. And I'm yours." Back home, they had a celebration. Not with champagne or caviar, but with juice boxes, pizza, and a homemade cake with "Dad +3" written in shaky icing. They danced around the living room in their new pajamas, their laughter echoing off the high walls that had once held only silence. Jonathan filmed every second on his phone, vowing never to forget a single moment. They asked to sleep in his bed that night. Just for tonight, they promised. They stayed for a week. He didn't mind. The following morning, Sophia gave him something wrapped in the same kind of paper they'd used for that mysterious gift box a year ago. He smiled. Inside was a crayon drawing, for stick figures, 3 girls and 1 tall man, with hearts all around them. Above the drawing were the words, "Our real home now." Jonathan didn't cry often. But he cried that morning. Months passed. He withdrew from his board position and created a new nonprofit, 3 Lights Foundation, named for Sophia, Bella, and Alice. Its mission? Housing and protecting children in homelessness across America. But more than that, he built a home. Not just of walls and ceilings, but of bedtime stories, giggles in the kitchen, shared pancakes, and whispered secrets under the covers. And the gift box the three little girls had given him still sat untouched on his nightstand. He never had to look inside. The real gift was already open, living, breathing, and now sleeping in the next room. Jonathan Blake had once dreaded birthdays. They were silent, hollow reminders of loss and years that passed without meaning. But not this year. Not on his 49th birthday. Because this year, the attic of his home echoed with giggles, the sweet scent of frosting, and the patter of 3 pairs of tiny feet. The little attic, converted long ago into a private reading space, had become the center of Jonathan's world. Its warm wooden beams and slanted windows now glowed with soft lantern light, casting golden shadows that danced along the ceiling. On the floor sat 3 blonde-haired, blue-eyed girls with frosting on their fingers and glitter in their hair. Identical in every way but full of their own little personalities, the triplets, Sophia, Bella, and Alice, had transformed his life in ways he could never have imagined. They were 6 years old, but each carried a light that could melt even the hardest winter. "Daddy," cried Sophia, the boldest, racing across the attic rug with a lopsided crown made of construction paper. "You forgot to wear your birthday hat." She climbed up onto his lap, jamming the slightly squashed paper crown onto his salt and pepper hair. Bella and Alice ran after her, arms full of handmade decorations, a banner that read, "Happy Birthday Dad," in crayon and a bouquet of yellow dandelions carefully taped together. Jonathan laughed, a sound that once felt foreign, now as familiar as breath. "You 3, he said, pulling them close, "are the greatest gift I've ever been given." "No," Alice said with mock offense, her face scrunching up. "You're not supposed to say that yet. We haven't even sung the song." Bella, always the quiet one, tugged gently at his sleeve. "Daddy, we made a cake. All by ourselves." "By yourselves?" he gasped dramatically. "Should I be worried?" She grinned proudly and pointed toward a small table in the corner. On it sat a somewhat lopsided chocolate cake, the top thick with uneven layers of frosting, crushed marshmallows, rainbow sprinkles, and something that looked suspiciously like croutons. Sophia saw the concern in his eyes. "We didn't put pickles in it this time." Jonathan tried not to laugh. "That's very reassuring." He let them lead him to the table, each girl holding one of his hands as if they were escorting a king to his throne. The attic wasn't grand. It wasn't where parties were supposed to be held, especially not for a man worth billions. But here, in this creaky, sun-warmed space filled with mismatched chairs, paper hearts taped to the walls, and the smell of childhood, it was perfect. He sat down before the cake. They lit 5 candles, because you're too old for all 49, Sophia explained, and then the girls huddled together. 1, 2, 3. Bella whispered. Then, in shaky unison, the girls sang. Musical note: "Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday dear Dayawati. Happy birthday to you. Musical note. The final note was drawn out, shrill, and hilariously off-key. But to Jonathan, it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He closed his eyes and made a wish, not for wealth, not for power, not for anything more than what he already had. When he opened them, the girls were watching him intently. "What did you wish for?" Alice asked, her eyes wide. "If I tell you," he said, leaning in close, "it won't come true." "Is it us?" Sophia asked, her voice suddenly tender. Jonathan nodded. "Always." They devoured the cake together, laughing when Sophia dropped a glob of frosting on her foot and when Alice announced she'd lost another tooth, "But I swallowed it by accident, so the tooth fairy's going to need proof." Bella, being the tidy one, tried her best to clean up, but her sisters kept sneaking frosting onto her nose. Then came the presents. Each girl had wrapped something in old newspapers, tied with yarn, and decorated with stickers. Sophia's gift was a rock she'd painted gold. "It's lucky," she declared. "You're supposed to carry it with you everywhere." Bella gave him a drawing of the four of them standing in a field under a rainbow. "I made sure everyone's hair was right this time," she said, pointing to the smudges where she'd used actual blonde hair she'd found on the brush. Alice, the most sentimental of the three, gave him a small wooden box she'd found at a yard sale and filled with buttons, feathers, and a note that said, "For when you miss us. But also for always." Jonathan blinked fast, trying to hold back tears. No watch, no sports car, no gala celebration could compare to these. After cake and gifts, the girls took turns putting on a show for him. Sophia danced ballet, in socks. Bella read a poem she wrote, that started off serious and ended with a joke about butts, and Alice sang a lullaby her mom once taught her, soft, haunting, full of unspoken history. Jonathan sat there, hands clasped, watching the girls through blurred vision. Just a few years ago, he hadn't known what he was living for. Just a few years ago, he was a man with a sealed birthday gift from a girl he couldn't find. Now, in his attic-turned-palace, with triplet daughters who each called him Daddy in slightly different tones, he understood everything. It wasn't charity that brought him to them. It wasn't rescue. It was fate. The memory of the three little girls who had changed his life with a single box, still close to his heart. But through their gift, it had somehow led him to Sophia, Bella, and Alice. He remembered the moment he saw them and the way they clung to each other like fearless birds. He knew then, without a doubt, they were meant to be his. And today proved it. As the evening light turned the attic golden orange, the girls curled beside him with full bellies and frosting-smudged cheeks. Sophia snuggled into his left arm, Bella on his right, Alice in his lap. Their identical heads of golden hair rested peacefully against him as he read a chapter from their favorite book aloud. And the king looked out over his land, but nothing was more precious than the laughter he heard in his own home. Jonathan's voice grew quieter. Bella blinked sleepily. "Daddy?" "Yes, baby. Can we have birthdays every day?" He smiled. "We'd run out of cake." "That's okay," said Alice. "You already gave us the best present." "What's that?" "You." Tears slipped from his eyes before he could stop them. He kissed the crown of her head, then Sophia's, then Bella's. And in that moment, sitting on an old attic floor with three little girls who'd turned his world right side up, Jonathan Blake finally, truly believed in miracles. Not the kind found in billion-dollar ventures. Not the kind brokered in boardrooms. But the kind that arrived softly, barefoot, with yellow hair and mismatched socks, bearing lumpy keiki and drawings with too much glitter. And as he blew out those 5 crooked candles, he not only made a wish, he found himself living that wish. We'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below and rate this story from 10 to 100. Tell us where you're watching from too. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if this touched your heart, check out more uplifting videos by clicking on the end screen now.